And welcome back. Josh Frydenberg is in our Canberra studio. Now, Josh Frydenberg is a young Liberal, a younger Liberal. I suppose he's not a young Liberal anymore, but a younger Liberal who's a member from Victoria. He's been given this extraordinary task of getting rid of red tape, which no one has ever succeeded in doing. So, Josh Frydenberg, welcome to the program.
Nice to be with you, Richo.
And can you tell me, why are you different to everybody else who's tried this?
Look, I think we realise that we've inherited a big budget mess, but also 21,000 additional regulations, and that was put on by the last government. Now, we've got a big task to remove that red and green tape burden if we want to boost productivity. You see, Richo, Australia has a big productivity problem. The Economist Intelligence Unit did a survey last year of 51 countries in terms of their productivity growth. And would you believe that Australia came second last out of 51 countries, just marginally ahead of Botswana? And if we are going to boost productivity, we've got to cut red and green tape. So Tony Abbott has said, this will no longer be with the Minister for Finance, this will no longer be with the Assistant Treasurer, this will come under the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet and will work with me closely as we try to cut $1 billion a year of red and green tape. So he's leading from the front. We've got a number of specific policy initiatives, and if we don't do it, Australia's productivity will not be lifted.
All right, let's say Tony Abbott's told you you've got to do it, but how do you do it? I mean, I've heard all those words for years. Everyone says the last government added X thousand pages of red tape, but no one ever does anything about it, really. Now, I mean, as an example, what are you going to do about the Tax Act? That drives everyone mad. And that is so big, by the way, you can't jump over anymore, let alone read it.
Look, there is certainly some simplification of the Tax Act that needs to be undertaken, and also for small business there's a number of measures that we can do to improve their relationship with the tax office and to reduce the red paper, the form filling and the red tape burden on them. But I'll give you one practical example. Take environmental approvals. In this country you can spend years and in some cases tens of millions of dollars if you are a company wanting to get an environmental approval. In fact, there was one case that the Business Council of Australia documented where a company wanting to make a major investment in Australia ended up having to have 4,000 meetings to get an environmental impact assessment. It was a 12,000-page document, and then when the approval came back there were 1,500 conditions attached, 1,200 at the state and 300 at the federal level. So we've said enough is enough. You cannot expect big investors both from Australia and overseas to go through that process. So we want to create a one-stop shop where we're going to delegate some of our powers down to the state level to avoid the duplication between federal and state governments when it comes to environmental approvals. And we've already had Queensland and New South Wales sign on. More states will follow. And I think that's a very practical example.
On the score of these environmental approvals, I mean, one of the problems here is that you do need proper environmental processes before you approve coal mines or developments on the beach or whatever. You do need them, and there do need to be conditions. You can't just say, I'm going to scrap the conditions, because then what's the purpose of the exercise in having any sort of environmental program?
But that's not the point, Richo. The point is at both the Commonwealth and at the state level, there is overlapping regulation. So they are actually doing the same thing, trying to meet a certain environmental standard. So there's two boxes to fill in when you really should be filling in one. That's an extra cost to doing business. I mean, I'll give you another very good example. The only way out of that is really to get one side to simply not be in it. And that presumably that would be you, that would be the feds. Well, what we're trying to do is get the federal standard in terms of environmental approvals applied at the state level by working with the states. And look, I say Queensland and New South Wales, two major jurisdictions, have already signed on. Greg Hunt's doing a great job getting the others on board. And this, could lead to hundreds of millions, indeed billions of dollars of investment flowing that otherwise would not flow. And I've heard in my consultations with business many examples where boards have taken decisions not to proceed with multi-billion-dollar investments merely because the complex regulatory process is such an additional cost and disincentive to invest.
All right, well, we've heard about some of the green tape, we've heard about the Tax Act. We're still only talking about a fraction of the red tape. Where else do you go?
Well, I'll give you an example, the university sector. It's estimated by Universities Australia that our universities spend nearly $300 million a year just in terms of compliance. Every university will have 15 to 20 or 30 dedicated staff just filling in forms to meet the requirements at the federal level. Now, that's clearly too much of a burden. There's all these data sets that are being required from universities that they don't know where they go. This information goes into a black hole. So Christopher Pyne has taken the initiative to give a direction to his ministerial department and to the bodies under him to actually go out there and cut red and green tape. Small business, it right now has the burden of administering the paid parental leave scheme. What we have said is the Family Assistance Office will take that obligation out of small business and look after it. In terms of remitting superannuation payments by small business to their employers, we want them to be able to do that through the ATO rather than sending out forms to a number of superannuation groups. It's those little things which, if you look right across the economy, they're happening everywhere, and if you can bring them together, I think we can make real headway in this regard.
Look, let's take a really big project which is guaranteed to have miles of red tape, and that would be the new airport in Sydney, if it's to be at Badgerys Creek, where, you know, the state government has been very reluctant about Badgerys Creek. The federal government's very keen, local council seems very keen, but how do you even get into that? How do you get, like you've said that New South Wales have signed up, they certainly haven't signed up on that.
Well, look, you're talking about a hypothetical there. There hasn't been any government announcement. But I'll tell you this, Richo, this government under Tony Abbott will ensure that there's proper regulatory impact statements for major legislative initiatives, cabinet submissions and the like. The problem under the last government was whether it was the carbon tax, the mining tax, the NBN, or indeed the changes to Fair Work Australia, none of them was subject to a regulatory impact assessment process. And basically the Prime Minister under Labor would give the exemption to the relevant minister. That's not going to happen anymore. We're going to be much more rigorous in how we apply regulatory impact assessment processes, and ministers will have to account if they introduce any new regulation for offsets elsewhere.
All right, let's take health, because we haven't mentioned health yet. It would seem to me that for patients, for GPs, for specialists, for hospitals, there's a massive amount of red tape, absolutely massive. I mean, I was Health Minister nearly 20 years ago. I know how much it's grown since then.
Absolutely. I mean, we're already taking some initiatives around the Therapeutic Goods Act. I'll tell you one area in the health space where we have already announced a major red tape reduction reform, and that's in medical research grants. One survey, Richo, found that in 2012, medical researchers from around Australia spent in total, would you believe, 500 years worth of time applying for medical research grants in that 1 year. Now, so many of those applications are unsuccessful. We want our medical researchers to be spending time in the laboratories, not time filling in forms and, you know, dealing with red tape. So we're going to streamline the medical research grant process. We're going to extend it from 3 to 5 years. We're going to do an early triage of the applications, so where there are some that are going to be, we think, unsuccessful, that they will be told early and they won't need to proceed to the next level. It's initiatives like that which came out of the McKeon review, which we believe can save a lot of money and also free up the time of our medical research areas.
Well, that's medical research, but I'm more concerned, as an example, about surgeons working in hospitals. And for them, it's that, well, they all tell me it's an absolute nightmare. You know, the whole idea of trying to apply to do the jobs that they want to do, and then the hospital, of course, has to justify to both you and the state what they've got to do after that.
Yeah, and I'm sure there is an area there ripe for reform. What we need to do is to use COAG as a more effective mechanism for cutting red tape. I mean, you'd know, Richo, from your own experience with COAG, that it's often described as a place you send policy where you want it to die. And it's had a lot of trouble in the past actually getting concrete outcomes. So what Tony Abbott has said is, let's make deregulation a standing item agenda at COAG, an agenda item at COAG, and let's try to move through some of these areas where there is federal and state overlap, and health would be a good example.
Any of your colleagues upset about you interfering in their portfolios?
Not at all. Actually, they're embracing it because I'm sitting down with each individual minister and working with them very closely on the areas that we can cut red and green tape. And as part of our policy initiative, what we are doing is asking each minister to set up a deregulation committee within their department, which will be made up of business people and others who can advise that minister on areas where they can cut red and green tape. We're also going to incentivise senior public servants in terms of linking their remuneration to their proven ability to cut red and green tape. We're going to assign a couple of sitting days in the parliamentary calendar to just repealing legislation, and we'll be doing that next year. So we're really going to turn the knob on this one, and we're really going to focus on how we can cut red and green tape right across the economy. I don't want to be another politician, Richo, who overpromises and underdelivers in this one. I actually want to deliver big cuts in red and green tape.
Well, Josh, what we'll do is we'll talk to you again in 6 months and see how much you got rid of in that time. How does that sound?
I like the sound of that.
Good on you, Josh. Josh Frydenberg in Canberra, thanks very much for your time, and I'll be back in just a moment with Richard Marles.